What do you do when you're not interested anymore? When a campaign has lost your interest, when your character is boring to you, when the story you and your group have invested so much into just starts to lose its spark. It's a terrifying thing to have to ask yourself, not because the world ends when you lose interest, but because for the story you've spent so much time on, the world technically does end. You have to ask yourself, is this worth investing into anymore if I'm disinterested? And why am I disinterested? And is it fair to the group that I am disinterested? I'm willing to bet that at some point most D&D players have experienced this feeling, and it can feel like it sucks all of the creativity out of you. Like a colored painting that has been drained of its vibrance, it taints everything around the story you've created. So what do? Do you dive further into the campaign? Do you dissect every portion of your character to find some form of inspiration? Do you introduce a brand new plot twist that could change everything? Well, okay, those are options. I will be honest, but I think the best option is to look in a mirror. To look at yourself and ask yourself not what about the campaign has lost your interest, but instead, what in life currently has you interested? It could be a new personal struggle. It could be a new fixation, like a book series or a new game. Or it could simply be a relationship in your life that has recently changed and will simply never be the same. The point is, a lot of times we have to realize that our campaigns, our characters, and the stories we craft together are in many ways a genuine form of art. And what is fascinating about art is that it draws inspiration not just from other pieces of art, but more importantly from our own experiences. And if our stories which we are crafting together are different forms of art, well then that means that we must accept the fact that it is going to draw upon your personal experiences whether you like it or not. Now, I'm willing to bet there's a large majority of people out there going, yeah, duh, because it is a little bit obvious. This isn't a new concept after all. In fact, this isn't even the first time that I've mentioned this on my own channel. But despite that, I think it's interesting that it can be really easy to know this and still forget when it is the most important to understand it. Because it's almost like we can feel guilt drawing upon ourselves because of this fact. Almost as if it's too egotistical or too on the nose. Like somehow we're playing into a cliche that we've made up in our own minds about a D&D player who focuses way too much on themselves and doesn't allow for natural storytelling to progress. You know, that one player who just only focuses on them and never the other people at the table. But here's the deal, friends. Drawing upon what you are currently experiencing in life is the single most natural storytelling tool that will ever exist. Think about it. What is more realistic, more emotionally resonant, and more well-researched than the exact experiences we go through every single day? From the mundane things which irritate us, to the deep fears we keep locked down so far we can barely even recognize them, to the small things which cause us to smile every day, and the jubilant triumphs we don't have anyone to share with, but we are nonetheless proud of ourselves for getting one thing out of the day right. These emotions are natural, fulfilling, they're real, and the greatest source of inspiration within our own campaigns, because they will always be from a place we are already 1000% invested into by necessity, which is our own lives. See, I've begun to come to a realization. I've always been so worried about putting too much of my own self into my characters and too much of my own self into my campaign stories and anything else that I make, honestly. And I always worry it's gonna come off as a little bit too self-congratulatory. Like I believe my own life is so interesting that I want everybody else to have to play through it as it's translated into my campaigns, so that they too can experience the amazing thing that is my life, so that they can know the rich inner world that I have and congratulate me on it. And while I don't think that that fear is totally unfounded, I do find that it may be severely misunderstanding of what it is to create a story. A story is a chance to communicate, to resonate with someone else, to explain a different way to view the world in a way that no other medium could. And my story, your story, it's not ever going to ever be able to be told by a single other person. It is so uniquely yours, as it is made from your triumphs, your failures, your greatest successes, and your most powerful disappointments. It's crafted from the emotions you felt on your worst day and the lessons you learned from the time you picked yourself up and chose to keep fighting when the world spit on you and told you to stay down. Every single person's story has something to say. It has something to say that someone else needs to hear. But when it comes to D&D, it's beautiful because it's not one person's story, is it? It's every person's story. It is everyone together, all at once, bouncing off of each other to create new ideas, viewpoints, and concepts and they work together to create lessons, triumphs, defeats, and moments of true, genuine connection with each other. And to try and keep your own story from joining with theirs is kind of selfish in a few different ways. It would rob the entire game of a portion of its heart, because the heart is every single person that's sitting across from you. It's to keep a piece that is you from people who want to see that and want to share back. So let's wrap this entire thing back around to the topic of the video real quick. What do you do when you lose interest in your campaign? You try and tell your story. You find out that you are currently going through something, you find the lesson that you're currently learning, you find the hurdle that you've been struggling to overcome this whole time, and you tell that story. You use that to communicate. Now, I want to make it clear. What I'm not recommending that you do is that you put all of this on your players, you trauma dump, you create a self-insert. I'm simply just not suggesting that you put everything that you're dealing with on their shoulders. To do such a thing is dangerous, and it's unfair if it's not been discussed beforehand anyways. And frankly, it's self-destructive because it puts you in a vulnerable and uncontrolled situation where you're setting yourself up to potentially be emotionally harmed because the rest of the group is just not aware of the events in your life and how they're affected by the game currently. Don't do that to yourself. But what I am suggesting is you look at the lessons you are currently learning in life, because we are all learning lessons whether we realize it or not, and ask yourself, isn't this lesson something worth exploring further? Whether you are learning that you need to be less brash and so you consider whether this is a lesson your character needs to learn, or whether you are overcoming a fear of vulnerability and so you explore what it might be like to have your character open up about a secret that they've kept hidden for their entire lives. Whether you are the GM and you are struggling to keep your grimdark campaign going because you have begun to desperately need to find that hope in your life, and so you introduce the idea to the players that maybe something could be made better in your world, or whether you're just lonely and you're tired of isolating yourself. So you begin to look at what it looks like when the other characters reach out to one another and how that looks when your character might choose to do the same. I don't suggest you put too much emotional weight on the game. I don't think that's fair to anybody or yourself. But I do suggest you understand that the game will have emotional weight when you're invested. Even if it's just a beer and pretzels, kick down the door and loot the dungeon kind of game, which is fun in its own right, if you are invested in that game, you'll find emotions in it. Because emotions are what make us human. They don't have to be heavy emotions, don't get me wrong, and they don't have to be too serious either, but they will be there. And when the investment is gone, often I find, at the very least, it's because we have not looked inwards at ourselves and asked the very incredibly crucial question, which we're all afraid of: what do I care about right now? And why do I care? And even more importantly, after this question, we skip the most keystone piece to the entire conversation and everything we need to understand to get over this hurdle. We have to give ourselves permission to care, to open ourselves up. And so if you let yourself care, find what you care about, and don't forget what it is to care. That's being human. So go out into the world and make it your own, you beautiful bastards.